All right, so for this new unit, we're going to be talking about World War One, which is also known as the Great War. So this is going to be split into a couple of different sections, and this first section is talking all about getting involved in the conflict. So how did the U.S. work their way into World War One? So we're going to start off talking about how war is the health of the state. This was a quote by radical writer Randolph Bourne that he stated right in the middle of World War One. So this means that war strengthens the power of the government at the expense of individual freedoms. So whenever there's a war, the power of the government grows while the individual freedoms of people shrink. So this also means that there's an increase in government control over people that increased while the class struggle was stifled or shut down. So all because the nation rallied around this patriotic desire to go to war to stop the what they thought was the evil Germans in World War One. So government control increased, the power of the working class decreased. So in the US, there was also a worry about the health of the state overall. So support for socialism, there's a new term, so make sure you write it down, was growing around the country, which threatened the capitalist, which we've learned about already, that capitalist way of life. So socialism is an economic system where the power is in the hands of the people rather than the select few. So the people control what is known as, make sure to write this down, the means of production. So instead of manufacturing and industry and businesses being owned by a single company owner, they are run by the workers. The workers make the decisions on what the company does. So that way the decisions are made in the best interest of the worker. So that's a short little nutshell definition of socialism, but we'll go deeper into that in another lecture. So why go to war? War was good for business and empire. So make sure to write this down. European empires like Germany, Great Britain, and France, they had run out of room to expand their empires. So they had colonized the majority of the world. So they began fighting for each other's colonies in Africa and the Middle East and different parts of Europe. So you see all these countries expanding. Eventually, they're going to run into each other and they're going to fight over that landed resources. So America needed to get in to boost the economy and create this fake sense of community between rich and poor, which would end up destroying any resistance from below. And the American public, also known, you could think of it as the working class, they opposed joining the war because they felt that the war was not their problem. That was not something that was impacting them. It was, in their opinion, a European issue. It was an old war fight, and America was, air quote, better than that. But Woodrow Wilson, he even won re-election on a platform of keeping us out of the war, also known as being an isolationist. He said, there is such a there is such a thing as a nation being too proud to fight. It is a war with which we have nothing to do, whose causes cannot touch us. So the president and the people were aligned in not wanting to be in the war. But we see that the American business is what was dragging the country into the war. So, what was known as an economic recession began in the US the same year that the war started in Europe in 1914. So, a recession being the economy tanked. It started to crash. People were losing their jobs, money. Wall Street, the rich on Wall Street were not making money. So, we see that the war had opened during a period of hard times. Businesses throughout the country were depressed. Farm prices, were deflated. Unemployment was serious, and that industries were looking to find ways to jumpstart the economy to help make more money. And so the war in Europe, known as World War One, helped to stimulate that economy or help the economy grow. You're selling more ammunition, weapons, and all that. So business is good. So America's kind of started joining the war a little bit by sending weapons, but before they full-fledged joined in and started sending troops in 1917. Um, The future, just to reiterate, the future of the American economy really became tied to an Allied victory. So the Allies being Great Britain, France. England and France paid, excuse me, Western allies outfitted their forces by placing a large orders with the US. So they were able to have England and France pay for the war by issuing these things called bonds. And American investors had $2 billion riding on pretty much they were placing a bet that Great Britain and France were going to win the war and be able to pay them back. The president, Woodrow Wilson, wanted to protect American business interest. So he wanted to American control over foreign markets and investment. So he wanted the United States to be able to control what other countries were doing. So he said famously, concessions obtained by financiers must be safeguarded by the state. So the state must protect the profits made by companies. So government, big business are working together. Never a good thing. Germany announced that their submarines would start sinking any ships bringing supplies to their enemies. And so Wilson used this economic interest to force involvement. So he started saying, like, hey, we're just trying to trade with countries, which we have the right to do. We're just sending goods, not, and he left out weapons. And so Germany started firing on American merchant ships. And so we see that Germany started this thing called unrestricted submarine warfare. So Germany declares that there's this zone in the seas around Great Britain, as you can see in this picture. And if any ships were found in that area, Germany was going to torpedo those ships, regardless of whether it was merchant ships or military ships. So any ships found in that zone were vulnerable. Any ship, they were given a 15-day notice, and they created this thing called a blockade around England. So pretty much they surrounded Great Britain. So this was done in response to a British blockade and a war zone established in the entire North Sea. So Germany ended up right here where we see sunk what was known as the Lusitania. This was a merchant ship going from the United States to England. Almost 1,200 people were killed, 124 of them being Americans. So America claimed that it was an atrocity as the cargo was innocent, what they claimed. But in reality, they had falsified their manifest and said that they weren't just carrying goods and services and people. In reality, they were carrying bullets, weapon cartridges, and bombs, all in the ship. Hence why it blew up so quick. So they were sneaking weapons from the United States to England. And so Woodrow Wilson warned Germany that any further actions would warrant U.S. intervention in the war. The Germany ended up apologizing and ceased sinking non-British passenger ships because Germany wanted to keep the U.S. neutral. They knew that they would end up losing the war if they had to fight the Americans. But finally, Germany felt like they had no choice but to resume this unrestricted submarine warfare because Britain's blockade of the North Sea was making it difficult for Germany to feed its people. So they were kind of gambling that they could force the Allies to concede before the U.S. entered into the war. That bet ended up failing. So we see that there was a lot of food shortages in Europe. And so because of that, Germany felt like they had no choice but to continue bombing the ships that were coming in, trying to force the Allies to give up, essentially, before the U.S. could join. So Germany, they knew that they only had a short amount of time before the U.S. joined the war. And so Germany wanted to bring Mexico into the conflict to keep the U.S. occupied. So Germany was hoping that if they could get Mexico to join on their side and fight the U.S., that the US wouldn't be able to go to Europe. And so Mexico was already on bad terms with the US after the Mexican American War that we learned about your 10th grade year. So Germany, their foreign minister named Arthur Zimmermann, sent an encoded telegram to the German ambassador in Mexico. A telegram's like an old, like a letter sent digitally back then. So that telegram, it instructed the ambassador to propose an alliance with the Mexican government if the U.S. declared war on Germany. Germany would fund a military campaign to take back the lost territories and give that back to Mexico, being Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona that used to be a part of Mexico. But Mexico didn't take it seriously because they didn't think that they could seriously challenge the U.S. militarily to take back their land. Plus, as we see at the bottom, Britain had already intercepted the cables between the United States or Europe and North America and had broken the Germans' ciphers, which was like a code. So they shared this information with the United States, who made it public. And the worst effect of this telegram was making the American public angry. So it had a reverse effect on what the Germans were hoping to happen. They hoped that Mexico would end up siding with them, but in reality, it ended up making the United States citizens want to join the war now, which is the opposite of what they needed. So to sum this up, Germany made a bet that they would end up being able to beat Britain before, or be able to beat Britain and France before the United States could join. They bet that they could get Mexico to join their side and make the US fight like a two-way war, when in reality, all this did was make the people in the United States actually want to join the war. So this is where we're going to leave off this time, and we will pick up again next time.